What is going on, guys? What is going on? In today's video, we got AI espionage that got the entire AI community in a frenzy. Anthropic just dropped this nuclear tweet accusing three of the biggest Chinese labs, DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, and Minmax, of running industrial scale distillation attacks on Claude. They say these labs created 24,000 fake accounts, ran over 16 million conversations, and basically stole Claude's brain to train their own models. And perhaps they were maybe expecting support from the internet, but that didn't necessarily happen. It kind of backfired. I mean, let's just be honest here. If you look on X or Reddit, they're getting completely roasted. But before we dive into that, let's go over what Anthropic is claiming, the crazy details from their blog, and why half of X are calling them basically massive hypocrites. Stick around, this is going to be a wild one. So first, here's a tweet from Anthropic that they posted. So they're basically saying that they have identified industrial scale distillation attacks by DeepSeek, Moonshot, and Minmax. So what is distillation? Distillation is basically when you take a big smart teacher model, like for example Claude, and use its output to train a smaller student model. This is totally normal, by the way, and legit, and it's usually what labs do with their own models, so that they can make cheaper versions for their customers. However, Anthropic is saying that these three labs use 24,000 fraudulent accounts plus proxy networks. They call it hydro clusters, which just means that one network was running multiple accounts, in this case 20,000 at once, to generate 16 million exchanges. Now, as you can see from their blog, MiniMax, they're basically saying MiniMax stole 13 million queries, and those queries were heavy on agentic coding and tool use. Moonshot AI, 3.4 million. And they were specifically targeting reasoning agents, computer vision, and data analysis. And DeepSeek 150, and they made Claude generate chain of thought reasoning plus censorship safe answers for sensitive topics. And they even claiming that they caught Minmax pivoting to a new model 24 hours after they released one of their own. And the whole propaganda angle is basically that, they're saying that once you distill a model, you can basically strip out all the safety guardrails. And because these are foreign labs, those capabilities go straight into military services and massive surveillance systems. They're basically saying that this bypasses US chip export controls. Because why buy expensive NVIDIA GPUs when you can just query Claude code a few million times? However, in their blog, they are saying distillation can be legitimate, but when it's done with fake accounts against their terms of service and by foreign competitors, then they basically say it's national security. And as a consequence of all of this, now they've probably already been doing this ahead of time, but they have now started to invest in better detection, like classifiers and behavioral fingerprinting, sharing intel with other labs and governments. I'm assuming OpenAI and Google, even though they're fierce competitors. And they're also begging for coordinated action from the whole industry and even policymakers. It really seems like to me that their main goal is really kill off open source, but I digress. Because then they went on to say the window is narrow, act now, blah, 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 that typical stuff, right? I mean, fair enough for them, but obviously the community was not having it. And let's go over some of the posts. This one is from Michael, or the Prime Agent. And he kind of has a point here, because if you look at what he's saying, is that he's basically claiming that Claude being an aggregator, and then they have already, done the dirty work, and, now that the Chinese labs are just piggybacking off of them, and they shouldn't really be complaining when they done it themselves, right? So I kind of agree with him. Let's go on to the next one. This is from Tori. He's basically saying, you train on the open internet, almost the same. He's echoing what Michael was saying, right? And then call it distillation attack when others learn from you. Labs that like to preach open research suddenly crying about open access. This is what happens when intelligence sits behind centralized API with subsidized tokens. I mean, there's not much to say. I kind of agree. He kind of echoing what Michael was already saying. Let's go on to the next one. Now, this one was actually pretty interesting, because this is one of the people that are kind of being affected by the whole AI era. So he's basically saying that he has a website about traditional Chinese medicine, right? And he spent years building it. And when he went into Claude and asked Claude about the topic, the model basically recited his blog, right? Word for word. So he had no mercy, obviously, even saying that they should spare him the gaslighting, which is insane. Let's move on to the next one. Now, this is very interesting because this is obviously the heart of how large language models are even possible. They scrape the entire web, right? The entire web. So this meme is basically kind of like asking Claude, where did your data come from, right? And then you see this person run away because they don't want to answer. They want to be politically correct, right? Where did your data come from? They don't want to answer because they obviously scraped the data and they took copyrighted materials, open repos, blog posts, news articles, whatever, and then created a model and then started to charge for it, right? So this is basically just saying you guys are hypocrites. Let's move on to the next one. Now this one is from Reddit, and again, the entire online community is just roasting these guys. So they're saying, I wonder how did Anthropic build their data set? Surely they manually had them annotated by humans. We all know that did not happen, right? Yes, and their model totally didn't accidentally call itself ChatGPT even as recently as the last generation. This was actually a thing I remember a while ago. When you were asking it and you were really, really pushing it, it will basically say that it's ChatGPT from OpenAI. Anyways, let's move on to the next one. I mean, we even have Elon Musk jumping in on the hate train. I mean, he literally reposted this on his Twitter feed, on his X feed, I mean. Did you know that Anthropic paid this was a settlement that they did with some authors? $1.5 billion, the biggest copyright settlement in history for stealing millions of authors' books from pirate sites to train Claude. Right. So yeah, Elon Musk retweeting. I mean, hilarious. He really does not care at all. He doesn't like OpenAI. He doesn't like Anthropic at all. He's like the black sheep of the industry. And also, this one was more technical, which is actually quite interesting because if you see what he says here, he basically saying, also correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they're true distillation attacks because the API doesn't return the token activation probabilities and the other juicy stuff needed to transfer knowledge. Sure, they can fine-tune a model to speak and act like Claude, but it's not as accurate as an open weight model distillation like the classic DeepSeek to Llama distills. He has a point to a certain degree. However, Claude is basically saying that the Chinese labs were basically extracting the outputs, the hard text of the model, which we all know, obviously, because they don't have access to the weights of Claude. And obviously, Anthropic knows that. So they're basically saying that, DeepSeek and Moonshot, they were like forcing Claude to articulate the internal reasoning behind a completed response and write it out step by step. They were basically telling Claude, hey, give me your entire blueprint and all the steps that you took to get to this specific answer. And training a smaller model on millions of this high quality step-by-step reasoning trajectories is widely accepted. This is actually the norm in the AI community as of today when it comes to distillation. So what do you guys think? Is this a legitimate security concern, or is Silicon Valley just, trying to pull up the ladder and just kill off open source and make sure everything is behind a paywall so that they can make money? Anyways, let me know in the comments. If you got value, be sure to hit like, obviously subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Peace.